afternoon. Let me welcome you to Johns Hopkins SAIS. I'm Reardon Rowett, the Director of the Western Hemisphere Program, Latin American Studies Program, and delighted to be the co-host with NDN and the New Policy Institute, and to welcome the Secretary to Johns Hopkins of what should be a very innovative and interesting presentation. We are talking about Latin America today, but quite clearly the social media issue in the Middle East is what has many of us fascinated in terms of the political implications. And at some point we will need to consider the political implications of social media in Latin America as well. As Latin America becomes increasingly middle class, and as it becomes an increasingly important consumer society, well, we're not going to have the kinds of upheavals we've seen in the Middle East. We may have more democratic and peaceful changes that really we have not really been able to understand until the present time. So co-hosting this event has been a very interesting process of planning, and we're all delighted that you could join us this afternoon. Let me introduce Nelson Cunningham, the Chair of Latin American Policy Initiative at NDN, to introduce the Secretary. Nelson.
Thank you, and welcome to everyone in this room and watching on the webcast. We're going to have an opportunity today for those of you not only in the room to participate in what we're doing, but also, and with people in the room, I've told we'll be tweeting our proceedings, but we'll also have the opportunity to take questions from those not just in the room, but those watching us on the webcast and following us remotely. So this is not only a discussion of public diplomacy, it is an actual act of public diplomacy. And thank you all for participating in that. I am Nelson Cunningham. I'm the very part-time chair of the Latin American Policy Initiative at NDN and the Progressive Policy Institute, which is a Washington-based think tank focused on bringing politics and policy together in ways that make each relevant to the other. NDN has had two long-time focuses, both of which come together here. One is on Latin America. The work for our Latin American Policy Initiative has been one that, and on Hispanic politics here in the United States, has been something that we've been working on for 4 or 5 years, making sure that what happens in Latin America is relevant in Washington and vice versa. And the second is following social media. NDN thought that social media was cool before anyone else did. Simon Rosenberg, the founder of NDN, who was here in the room with us, was telling me about Joe Trippi before Joe Trippi knew who Joe Trippi was, back before the Howard Dean campaign in 2004, thinking about how to make politics accessible to the public and to make the public interact with policy settings using social media has been something that NDN has been focusing on for a long time. So it is a real pleasure to be here today. We're going to have two parts of the program. The first, we are truly honored to have Undersecretary Judith McHale, and I'll introduce her in just a moment. And then the second half, and that will be for the first hour, the second half of the program, we're going to have 4 noted thinkers and practitioners of social media in the region who will help talk to us about social media in Cuba, Venezuela, Brazil, Mexico, and Peru, which is having an election next week. How is social media influencing those elections? How is it influencing political change in Latin America? Let me start by introducing someone who really I think is her background makes her so perfectly suited for this position. Undersecretary of Public Diplomacy at the State Department, and when I'm done in about 2 minutes, you'll see why. Judith McHale was born the daughter of a Foreign Service officer and grew up in the Foreign Service, living abroad in, among other places, Great Britain and apartheid-era South Africa. Living in South Africa gave her the passion for social justice that I think has impelled a great deal of her career. She then made the mistake that a lot of us make and went to law school, but unlike most of us, she then found a way to break out of that in a really exciting fashion. In the 1980s, for most of the people in this room, you don't understand what this will mean. But in the 1980s, she was general counsel of MTV. Now, MTV in the 1980s was Facebook, Twitter, Google, all rolled up into one. It was the single coolest social and media innovation that we had ever experienced. And Undersecretary McHale was there at that. And then Nickelodeon, which has shaped all of your minds, was also part of that, family, as well as VH1. She then went to the Discovery Channel as general counsel, when the Discovery Channel was one cable channel in one country, the United States. By the time she left, 10 years later?
20.
No, 20 years later.
That's a decade.
MTV had 100 channels.
Discovery.
Discovery had 100 channels in 35 languages all around the world, and their revenues had exploded beyond anything that they could possibly have believed. So you see why Undersecretary McHale brings to this position all of the skills that you need to help the world take advantage of what social media can offer, and frankly, to help the U.S. government tell its story around the world, which is her function. She is also a very close and longtime intimate of our Secretary of State, and that only adds to her influence and her ability to shape affairs here and to tell our foreign policy story abroad. So please join me in welcoming Undersecretary McHale.
Thank you, Nelson, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. I'd also like to give a special welcome to everyone joining us over the internet at our binational centers throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. This will be a truly interactive, multinational, global event. We couldn't have picked a more salient topic or a more critical time to talk about new media and their impact on our relationships around the world. Throughout the Middle East, people are shaking off decades of restrictive government controls. New media and the internet have provided a long-looked-for public space for opposition groups to organize their supporters in a movement, and that movement is transforming our world. Ideas are infectious. They always have been. Today, immediate and widespread access to information allows ideas to circulate virally. It empowers people to participate in the political lives of their countries, and it equalizes voices. The internet has made it possible to reach more people in more places, but it has also shifted power and influence to such an extent that it is necessary to engage with more people. This means we can no longer hope to control how and when and through what medium people form their impressions of us. More so now than ever, public diplomacy is a vital component of the foreign policy of the United States. Engaging and telling our story to people around the world both advances our national interests and enhances our national security. And if we are not the ones telling our story, you can be assured someone else will. We cannot afford to play defense in an ever-changing landscape. To put it bluntly, the world has changed, and if we do not change the way we interact with people, we risk being marginalized or being made obsolete. So we are doing everything we can to connect with people, all 6.8 billion of them, to better ensure the stability and security of our country, our region, and our world. And we take this mission very seriously. At the State Department, we recognize that standalone government-to-government diplomacy is no longer enough. From Secretary Clinton down, we are embracing new media and new technologies as vital tools for what we call 21st century statecraft. We are not so naive as to believe that we can build meaningful relationships with people using nothing but social networking sites. There is no virtual equivalent for face-to-face interactions with Americans. But new media can be the first connection that sparks a curiosity to learn more about one another. Or it can be the second contact that helps cement and build a relationship over time and distance. Each of these interactions leaves a different impression and shows a person he or she is important to you. So today, I'd like to share with you some of the ways we are using new media and connective technologies to modernize our public diplomacy. Technology has not changed the aim of our public diplomacy efforts. We want to form personal connections and strengthen the relationship between Americans and people around the world. That was true 50 years ago, and it will still be true 50 years from now. But technology has moved the work of public diplomacy into new arenas. Today, we are connecting directly with new audiences. We are shifting the spirit of public diplomacy from one-way messaging to two-way engagement. As we do this, Latin America and the Caribbean provide us with a natural testing ground for more broad-based diplomacy. The population is young, connected, and hungry for education and information. Our people are united by a shared history, shared values, and a shared environment. And throughout the region, people are savvy about using technology to find opportunities to connect. It takes effort to cultivate these relationships and use new media responsibly and effectively. Like all public diplomacy, new media outreach requires research and an element of risk. It takes planning to match the right tool with the right opportunity. We have to know our audience to understand what messages will resonate with them and what messages can be amplified using social media. When we see what gets a response, we improve our ability to try new things in the future. If we do this right, we can also learn more about our audience. We can ask about their needs and opinions, and they can tell us. New media and connected technologies enhance our ability to listen. That is the #1 improvement to our 21st century public diplomacy toolkit. Social media provides new ways for us to keep our ear on the ground. And when we better understand cultural attitudes and developing trends, social media can help us craft better policies. Anyone with a mobile phone or an internet connection has the ability to communicate with us. We see every message and we engage as equals. This feedback is an incredibly valuable resource, whether the feedback is positive or negative, because it allows us to better understand how our actions and decisions are being interpreted by people and governments around the world. It can also serve as an early warning system to head off public diplomacy concerns before they become full-blown crises. We can share immediate information and provide rapid response answers to questions as they arise. More importantly, a two-way flow of information encourages the kinds of partnerships that are critical to our relationships throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. As President Obama said just last week in Santiago, in the Americas today, there are no senior partners and there are no junior partners. There are only equal partners. And these partnerships require mutual responsibility. New media support our commitment to mutual responsibility by increasing accessibility and transparency. They allow us to pursue our shared goals in dialogue and partnership, and they help us build goodwill and connections directly between our people. We all remember how the world mobilized in response to the devastating earthquake in Haiti last January. Not just governments, but citizens who saw the immediacy of the tragedy on their personal cell phones and laptops. Working with our private sector partners and the Red Cross, we set up a mobile donation system that provided an outlet for Americans' generosity and compassion. Together, we raised a groundbreaking $40 million in $5 and $10 increments. But we also partnered with local telecom providers to develop a free SMS shortcode. Using the code, patient citizens could tell relief workers where they were and what they needed. It allowed us to bring a massive response effort to a very personal scale. One woman was able to send a message using the short code when she went into labor. With one text, she alerted first responders to her location and situation, and they arrived in time to help her deliver a baby. In another instance, a camp of displaced survivors had not received any supplies for days. 2,500 people with no food, no water. After receiving text messages from individuals living at the camp, we were able to direct aid distribution before the situation worsened. None of this would have been possible without partnership and two-way communication at every level. Our Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, Arturo Valenzuela, is very open to new media as a way to foster conversations with citizens across the Americas. Today, anyone interested in learning what the Assistant Secretary is doing can follow his tweets. They can friend him on Facebook, or they can ask him a direct question in a digital town hall meeting like the one he hosted last November. Of course, we're not interested in developing social media platforms for the sake of having them. We are interested in applying social media to promote our strategic objectives in the Americas. Senior officials in Washington use new media to involve people throughout the region in a give and take on policy topics, and our embassies use these openings to spur follow-up discussions on regional priorities. New technologies open up new and creative ways to build towards our goals. President Obama has outlined 4 pillars for our regional partnership with the Western Hemisphere: protecting citizen security, expanding economic opportunity and social inclusion, securing our clean energy future, and supporting democratic, transparent, and accountable institutions of governance. Public diplomacy supports and strengthens each of these pillars. For example, we are coordinating a series of webinars over the course of this year to celebrate the history and culture of Afro-Latinos. And Embassy Bogota organized a web chat between high school students in Colombia and Indiana to talk about combating racism and discrimination. Each of these programs use technology and new media to promote the Obama administration's goal of advancing racial equality and social inclusion throughout the region. We are increasingly using mobile technology to improve our engagement. On average, 89% of people in Latin America and the Caribbean have a mobile phone. Only 6.4% have broadband internet connection. SMS programs and mobile apps allow us to communicate with broad segments of the population, many of whom we have few other ways of reaching, and what makes mobile a powerful resource to promote our regional agenda. We are also exploring opportunities to share information about English language learning or exchange programs via mobile phones. In Colombia, we are working with the Colombian government, NGOs, and Mobile Medic to connect landmine victims with community health services. In Mexico, we are partnering with the Public Safety Secretariat and NGOs to develop an anonymous tip line to allow citizens to safely share information regarding criminal activity. Obviously, social media and mobile technology are not the silver bullet for any of our policy goals, but they can be effective ways to organize people and share critical information. So we are working with innovative thinkers and technology developers across the region to put new tools in the hands of community groups and citizen activists. 2 of our signature programs to facilitate this are Tech Dells, or technology delegations, and a tech camp for civil society organizations. Tech Dells bring innovators to a country to learn about its needs and environment. Then the innovators help facilitate citizen-level solutions to state-level challenges. Many of the examples I've already shared with you, the mobile-based solutions in Haiti and the anonymous tip line to fight narco-trafficking in Mexico, were launched because of a Tech Dell. Last November, we convened the first ever tech camp in Santiago to bring NGOs who know the issues and the needs of their communities together with technology experts. As part of Secretary Clinton's Civil Society 2.0 initiative, Tech Camp allowed NGOs to share ideas with one another and explore ways technology can empower their grassroots efforts. And Tech Camp participants have since put these ideas to work. They are empowering youth in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro and helping mend the social fabric in Ciudad Juarez. In our view, new media and new technology are not valuable in and of themselves. They are only valuable when we can use them to improve people's lives and make connections. At its best, the power of new media is a very personal one because social media are about forging one-to-one connections. We must never forget the individuals who make up a network. Behind every online handle and every hashtag, there is a person trying to make a connection. They deserve to be treated as such. Humans long to connect with and learn from other humans, but no one wants to connect with a sterile diplomatic presence that does nothing more than serve up some stale information in bite-sized bits. Legions of online followers or likes mean very little if the interaction never moves beyond the virtual realm. The challenge is turning our online presence into live one-to-one encounters. A successful social media presence is interactive, it is transparent, and it is personal. Only then can we provide a response and start up a conversation between real people. From my work at MTV and Discovery, I have long known about the innovative ways Latin Americans use media. So when I visited again last summer, I was impressed by the creative ways our embassies are using social media to connect. In Uruguay, the embassy has turned online visitors into real friends by hosting simple contests with simple prizes. A game of foosball with the ambassador, for example. Just think about the public diplomacy impact of saying to your friends, I beat the American ambassador at foosball yesterday. The staffers who run Embassy Montevideo's Facebook put their names and pictures right on the homepage, so Uruguayan fans know they're dealing with real people. Embassy La Paz has another great success story of turning online engagement into face-to-face connections. In a country of fewer than 10 million, the embassy has almost 32,000 Facebook fans thanks to regular content updates and frequent contests. As in Uruguay, the prizes often involve little more than a coffee with an American staffer or dinner at the principal officer's house. These simple but meaningful encounters are as much a prize for our public diplomacy officers as the Bolivian winners. Yet we always hear how surprised the Bolivians are that embassy officials would make time for them. They say they did not expect such openness from the United States. And at Embassy Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, the Public Affairs section decided to open up their Facebook page to all embassy officers that engage in public outreach. Staff used the page to talk with individual users about topics ranging from embassy programs and contests to sometimes controversial topics. Thanks to this high level of personal attention, the embassy page has exploded from having 1,000 fans a year ago to more than 37,000 today. In each of these examples, the power is not the platform, it's the people. And social media builds on decades of expertise we've developed promoting people-to-people outreach. In preparation for President Obama's visit to Latin America earlier this month, we set up a mobile website through Facebook and invited Brazilians to send welcome messages to the president. Over the course of 2 weeks, we received more than 31,000 text messages and 500 videos from all over Brazil. Embassy Brasilia grew its Facebook fan base by more than 750% and doubled its Twitter followers. These are impressive metrics. But the real testament to the campaign success is in the messages from Brazilians themselves who were eager to connect with President Obama. A man named Fred wrote in from Brasilia, "It's an honor to welcome the first American president that looks Brazilian. Welcome home, Mr. President." Another came from a teacher in Mosoro named Kessia Nunez, who had told her class about President Obama. She said, "They told me how they were amazed by the man who shows that no matter where we come from, our race, our religion, we all can reach our dreams." At the State Department, we are not using social media and new technology because they are a current fad. I've worked in popular media long enough to know how long fads can last. We are using new media because they enable us to do something different, to hear directly from Fred and Kessia and all her students about what matters most to them, and to thank them for their input. When we successfully do that, we affirm again and again how much more there is that unites us than divides us. So that I hope that you will all join us in figuring out how best to use these new media going forward. We are open to any ideas and suggestions. We want to tap the connections of people here in this room and of those participating online and throughout the region, so we can keep up with all the opportunities new media and connective technologies bring. Because we're not looking for fans or followers, we're looking for partners and people to help us lead. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing, Undersecretary McHale, your vision and the State Department's vision and Secretary Clinton's vision for how we can do a better job here in the United States and here in our State Department of letting the world know what we're thinking of and in hearing from them. We're going to spend about the next 25 minutes taking questions from the audience and from our web audience. So we're going to call on people here in just a moment. Let me go ahead and perhaps start with an initial question. You spoke principally about how the U.S. government is using social media to reach out to populations around the world. As Professor Rowett started in his introduction, foreign populations are finding that they can use social media to communicate with their governments too, and that is creating events around the world, as we saw in Tunisia, in Egypt, as we've seen in Iran. Help us assess how the U.S. government is looking at public participation in social media around the world in ways that can influence the way governments act. And of course, in this hemisphere, we have some key examples.
You know, there are a lot. That's a great question. There are a lot of examples of it, and I think it's something that governments all over the world are struggling with. The impact of them from a positive and, in some cases, negative perspective. Having this, and from my perspective, the more information, the more citizens participate in the lives of their country, the stronger those countries will be, and we sort of talk about that, and I believe that quite strongly. And I think governments are trying to find their way through all of this. You know, there was an interesting moment where one of my colleagues was addressing all our ambassadors a couple of weeks ago, and arguably amongst the top leaders in foreign policy are ambassadors from around the world. And he said, could everybody raise, who knows who's leading the revolution in Tunisia, please raise their hand. And of course, nobody raised their hand. All right, who's leading the revolution in Egypt? You couldn't raise your hand because there was no one individual. And when you think about that, and one of the reasons why we are so focused on doing what we're doing is, as I said in my remarks, the world has fundamentally changed. And I, again, believe in a good way, providing people across societies, deep into societies, with access to information which truly empowers them. And so what we're trying to do is figure out, knowing that that's going to that is happening, that is a positive force for change, I believe, in society. How are we as governments going to interact with people? And so a lot of our focus is trying to find new ways so that you have to understand that you are in an interactive mode where the flow of conversation and communications has to be two ways. So we're trying to do that. I think in the understatement of the afternoon, it's a very complicated world now for governments to figure out how to go forward. But it's not going to change. It's going to get better. And I think what it leads you to is, as we're seeing throughout the Middle East, is greater citizen participation. I hope that it will lead to an environment in which governments are more responsive to the needs of their people. And so we're sort of analyzing that, assessing it, and seeing how we can do it. And the conversation has to be, it's not about us, it's about them, and how do we sort of continue that conversation and dialogue.
You know, of course, because social media are two-way channels of communication, some governments are figuring out that there are ways to communicate with their own people, and sometimes in ways that we might not entirely agree with. One example within our own hemisphere, the Twitterer with the most followers in Venezuela is Hugo Chavez. And he has figured out how to use these media to influence his people and to reach out to them. And perhaps not always in ways that we might favor, but in ways that he feels are good for his government and his leadership.
I think you're seeing that everywhere. You're seeing that around the world. And that is the world in which we live. And therefore, knowing not only that's one example, clearly the way that's being used, but we have many examples of others doing it, which is why it's critically important for us to engage and be part of the dialogue and the discussion. We have to be part of it, and we have to be in the heart of it, where we are articulating our positions, where we are using every tool that we have to do that, to engage in that global dialogue and discussion. Because if not, I believe we can't sort of move our own agenda forward. We have to be part of that discussion and dialogue. We can't leave for others. And that's really challenging. It's particularly challenging, I think, in the realm of diplomacy, which traditionally has been discrete conversations between individuals about and wanting to keep it all very quiet and not engage. We can't do that any longer, and so it's important for us to be out there. If we do not do that, the sort of rules of the 20th century, some of the conventional rules, if somebody says something about you that you don't like, don't respond, it will go away. It never goes away. In fact, it grows, and so you have to be part of that, articulating your own position, taking part in what is now a global debate.
Well, speaking of global debates, let's turn now to to people in the room. And for those of you who are watching this on the web, we've got about 100 people here at the Johns Hopkins School. It's a mix of students, of diplomats, of business people, of journalists, of think tank types, all here. And I see some hands already. There with the blue scarf, and I think we've got, do we have microphones?
Oh, we don't need them there.
We don't need them because we are so wired. Please just tell us your name and who you are, and then speak up and ask your question.
As Secretary McHale, thank you so much for your great remarks. My name is Liz Harper. I'm in Public Affairs at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And my question for you is, how does the State Department measure success, or what is effective?
I think that's a great question, and to be perfectly honest, it's one that we struggle with, but which we absolutely have to hold ourselves, sort of hold our feet to the fire on it, being sure that we can measure effectiveness. So each program that we're launching, and it's not just numbers, right? I mean, because it's easy, I quoted a lot of numbers, and you could look at those and say, well, that's really working, but it's not really that. I think it's one of the things that, one of the measurement tools is we're trying to develop systems for measuring attitudes and opinions as trends over time. You can sort of see, are you being effective in your messaging? Are you, in some cases, changing, hopefully, for the better attitudes towards the United States? Do people have a better understanding of whether they like it or not, but do they have a better understanding of our policies, goals, and initiatives? So that's one of it. So the numbers are part of it. Part of it is what is the engagement, and if over the long term we can actually have a positive impact overseas.
Yes, here in the second row.
Secretary McHale, my name is Edie Wilson, and I just wrote a piece for the Washington Post about social capital in Mexico. And I'm fascinated by your comment about the tech dells being used to develop anonymous reporting for criminal activity in Mexico. We know from Ushahidi's work in Kenya that social media can be used brilliantly to identify political violence and criminal activity. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you see social media being applied in this dreadful situation at the border?
You know, we're very focused on that, and you mentioned Ushahidi, which has been a phenomenal, I think, a phenomenal platform and a phenomenal tool, which we've actually worked with them all over the world. We worked with them in Haiti, we've worked with them in Pakistan and elsewhere, because I think what they provide, it's really providing people with access to information and things that they can use to help. You know, as we're assessing sort of crisis situations around the world, whether it's in Mexico or elsewhere, whether it's a natural disaster or something that's going on in the country, one of the key deficits that we've identified is information to a citizen that they can use, that's important, or tools that they can use to identify what's going on in their country, get access to the information that they need. So we're very focused on trying to sort of provide that information to people, and again, not only in Mexico, but in Pakistan as well. We believe that the more we can help provide these tools and access to information by developing new networks for people to allow them to connect in these very, very difficult situations and environment, this is a positive contribution that we can make. So in the case of Mexico, what we did was some technology, and we do it through a combination of both bringing folks from the United States, technology experts who might have some ideas, but the important part to me is getting them together. The State Department's role is really as a catalyst and a convener, identifying a need and bringing in experts who can work with people on the ground in a particular country or an environment to develop applications which are directly relevant to them. And so that's the model that we're going to continue to follow.
Yes, sir, right here. And by the way, those of you who are watching this online, I think there are instructions provided there on how you can communicate with us. And Sam Dupont, who's sitting over here, will tell me when we have some questions to move forward. Thanks. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Undersecretary McHale, for being here. My name is Felipe Stefan. I'm Colombian, and I graduated from the Syracuse University Public Diplomacy program last year. My professor is sitting right by me. So I should ask a pretty good question.
The grade is still pending.
Often when we're discussing this in class, and I see this in the professional environment that I'm in right now, we talk about public diplomacy, and we often talk about telling the American story. And I was wondering whether you could tell us what that American story is, and whether there's a single American story.
Well, the answer to the last question is no, I don't think there is a single American story. Obviously, there are a multitude of stories, and what we're trying to do in public diplomacy throughout Latin America and the rest of the world is to be sure all of those stories are being told. I think you have the fundamental people around the world. There's been a lot of discussion about telling the American story. The reality is many people around the world know the history of our country, our values, and the great strengths of our country. And so what we're trying to do is to reinforce that message. But the most important thing I think we're trying to do is increase the number of faces and voices of America as seen around the world by reaching out to citizens across our country to engage them with their peers and counterparts in other countries. So let me give you an example from last week when I was out on the West Coast. I was in San Francisco, and we used a Skype connection between kids from disadvantaged communities in Redwood City to talk to their peers in Karachi, Pakistan, and Rawalpindi, and it was incredible. I mean, it was a fairly, Skype is a fairly simple technology now, widely available. But if you could have seen the way the kids on both sides of this discussion got closer and closer to each other as they had that conversation, this is the way that I couldn't have told those kids in Karachi about these kids in Redwood City, but the kids on both sides, the kids in California learned a lot about what's going on in Pakistan, which we know there are a lot of challenges there, and the kids in Pakistan saw a different side of America. They didn't see me, they saw kids who were pretty similar to them, really, and dealing with a lot, and you begin to see that, and that's what we're trying to do, is really show the breadth of our relationship, of our population, rather, across borders.
There in the far back.
My name is Lexan, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Maryland. I'm studying public diplomacy. And the question that I have, you mentioned listening and two-way communication. It's kind of a framework for public diplomacy right now. What I'm wondering about is there's a system inside the country to listen to people and act accordingly. There's a voting system, there's different forums where the public can voice opinions and the government can adapt their actions. Is there a system to listen to those public outside the country and have them also influence the actions or behavior of the government? I think this would be an interesting ground to explore.
Well, a lot of what we're doing is to achieve that goal, precisely to achieve that goal, on the theory that if you do a better job of listening, if you understand what is important to the people with whom you are trying to engage, you'll be more successful in your outcomes. And so a lot of the work we're trying to do is precisely designed to achieve that objective. So some of the things we've done structurally, last year we introduced, we created 7 new Deputy Assistant Secretary of State positions within the State Department within a very short period of time. I was told it was a record to be able to do that. We created them and we filled them, let me say. 6 of those, each of our regional bureaus were divided up into geographic bureaus, was a new Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in each of our regional bureaus. One of them, Fabiola Champoli Rodriguez, is with us today, who's the representative, the DAS for Latin America. And the idea was that they would be responsible for both injecting information into the policy deliberations, that they would have a seat at the table, and for getting that information out. And by being there at the time that policies were being formulated, our policy making would become more informed about the attitudes and opinions of foreign publics whose our decisions would impact. As we were formulating policies, if we knew what was on the minds of the people who might be impacted by this, we could do a better job of it. That's not to say that our foreign policy is being driven by foreign opinion. That would not be appropriate. I mean, it's really our foreign policy. But that there are ways that you can do it. Simple things like how you message, frankly, can really change. But understanding what is important to the people you are trying to reach is a key step and a major step forward in our ability to do that. So that's organizationally we have done that, and we're trying to inject new understandings of consumer behavior, which is not something that governments have typically done, so we're doing that. And when we're doing simple things, I talk about, obviously all of you know, when the volume of messaging when you try to do this is enormous. When the president went out to Africa, to Ghana about a year and a half ago, we did a sort of significant multimedia approach to get out. We got like 250,000 questions in for people. How do you do that? And then those questions and the dialogue afterwards led to massive engagement across the continent of Africa. So we're using software tools which will allow us to stream tweets and other things so that we can identify what are the key themes that are really resonating. We're trying to understand the audiences that are engaging with us so that we can get really good at virally response. So, because the one thing would be really bad is if we're just getting all the incoming stuff and it becomes pretty obvious we're not listening. We are listening, but in order to demonstrate that, we have to specifically respond to what's on the people's minds, and so we're trying to do that. So both structurally and using technology in a much more effective way.
Undersecretary McHale, for decades the U.S. government has had a policy of using more traditional media to communicate with repressed societies. Radio Free Europe, TV Marti, Voice of America. How are we using social media today to do the same job? And what does that say about the future of Radio Free Europe and Voice of America and the other traditional media?
Well, let me be really clear. I think it's a mix. It's not one or the other. One is not going away. I mean, I think history shows you that in the world of technology, it's sort of additive in most cases. And so we actually, when we go in and we're assessing what we're doing, it's the kind of analysis we used to do at Discovery, but you go in and you understand the market in which you're operating, and you have to understand what is the most powerful medium for reaching your audience, what's the most appropriate medium. And to be perfectly honest, today, the number one around the world, television is still the most important way of reaching people. And so we're not abandoning traditional. In Africa, radio is critically important. And so it's a question of how you develop your strategy. And all these things complement each other. They do complicate each other, but they complement each other in ways to maximize your impact. So it's not one or the other. It's really designing strategies using every tool that you can, because we do live in a very complicated world, and that's the best way to do it.
We've got time for one or two more questions. Yes, in the back row with the green scarf, and then we'll come to the gentleman here in the beard. Why don't we ask both questions together? No. Okay.
My name is Cadley. I'm originally from Brazil, and I work as an analyst for Google. My question is how the State Department is dealing with some government reactions against, or maybe suspicious on this new approach to social media in some countries.
Sure, and I think there are many, change, uncertainty, disruption. I mean, those are all words that would come from when you're talking about social media, and frankly, that makes governments everywhere a little nervous in terms of how's it going to affect them. If you're going, and particularly if you're in an environment where you have controlled the message, or you attempt to control it, you're going to become nervous about it. My personal belief is you can't stop it, so you might as well figure out how to engage in it. So with your particular question in mind, we all know that there are a number of countries around the world who have tried to constrain information, try to sort of shut it down, build firewalls, take them down. They can't. It's a sort of silly game, because the reality is, even in the most repressive of regimes, sophisticated, not even so sophisticated, but people are finding ways to get around whatever firewall you put up. And so therefore, we, in our active, both our public and our private conversations with governments everywhere, encourage them to support the free flow of information. Think about China, which is one of the governments which is trying to control. There are 70 million bloggers in China. right? And so how are they going to continue to do that? And I think at the end, they're going to continue to try, and obviously the government of China is quite sophisticated in its efforts to do that, but I think at the end of the day, they can't win. That this you cannot stop the free flow of information. We've seen time and again where individuals and organizations can find their way around it, and their efforts will be, I think it's sort of a little bit of a whack-a-mole game that I think they're going to lose.
Good. Yes, sir. We'll have the final question here.
Thank you. My name is Dan Cornfield. I'm a student here at SAIS. A very broad and a very specific question. So very broadly, I was just curious what you would say the largest public diplomacy challenges are in the Latin American region for the United States today. And then very specifically, I was curious about the example of how are you using social media to communicate to Latin America President Obama's rationale for the current actions in Libya?
Well, I think in the first one, our biggest public diplomacy challenge there is to continue to do everything we can to really engage with people, to make this, to sort of transition from a one-way environment where we were just messaging out to people, to really find new ways of engaging with them. Because I think we have to do that. If we don't, we're going to lose a lot of ground. It's one of the reasons why I talked about some of the things our embassies are doing there, which I think are particularly innovative in an environment. Many of you know that bureaucracies are resistant to change, and they're resistant to risk. You know, I mean, this is risky, and so we have to. Probably one of our challenges, we have to create an environment in which our officers feel comfortable and can take those risks, knowing, and this is the conversation I had with Secretary Clinton up front, knowing people are going to make mistakes, but it's not necessarily a career ender if you sort of get slightly off message on something. We're going to give them the tools, we're going to give them the rules, we're going to give them the guidelines, and trust them to do it right. And my biggest fear is we don't do enough of that. We have to do more than that. I have to say, in Latin America, our embassies are really leading the way in many, many of these initiatives. So I'm hoping that will be the case. And the second question was about the president's message on Libya. One of the things we're trying to do there is, as the president or the secretary or others speak, is to very quickly find ways of getting that message into the environment through some traditional means of just using video clips and sort of pumping it out, arming our officers up front with the information they need to describe and explain this, to sort of fairly traditional outreach to press and other media, to be sure that we're providing them with opportunities to ask questions, maybe not questions to the president, but of our assistant secretary and of others. So we're trying to do that. And in this connected world, we're very focused on the fact that there's no issue. I mean, what's happening in Libya has an impact in Latin America, and so we're moving to understanding that, the interconnectedness of all of this. One of the other positions we created last year was the new Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Media, because traditionally embassies, you know, they dealt with the media within their country. And so if you're in Brazil, or as it happened actually in the time of the Haiti earthquake, when Al Jazeera shows up on your doorstep, you may not know it. So one of the big changes we've made is understanding that what you say here has an impact and a relevance just about everywhere in the world, and trying to retrain our officers and our ambassadors to understand that.
Well, before I ask you all to thank Undersecretary McHale, let me just say we'll turn now to the panel. Sam DuPont and the four members of the panel will come up, and then we'll turn to the second phase of looking at more concrete examples on how social media is affecting policy and politics in Latin America. Let me ask you now, though, to join me in thanking Judith McHale for joining us for a really fascinating talk.
So without any delay, we're going to move right into the panel. So keep your seats and let's go on. I think it's the State Department. Thanks for coming.
No, thanks. Actually, I'll go ahead.
We don't even have
Great panel, you're taking off.
Glad you're able to make it. Okay, I'm going to bring to you first.
Yeah, because I got the least to say.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you for sticking around for this excellent panel we have assembled here. Before I introduce everybody, I really ought to also thank Undersecretary McHale for joining us today and her staff for making that possible, as well as SICE and Dr. Rowett for having us here. Nelson, the chair of our Latin America Policy Initiative, is co-hosting this along with NDN's Global Mobile Technology Initiative. And also thank Jennifer Zurich and Ana Maria Vidal, who really made this happen. I don't feel like at this point I need to explain to you how social media has become important in Latin America. I guess all I'll add is to say on a couple of statistics. One is that the number of Latin American internet users grew 20% in the past year, making it the world's fastest growing region. 8% of all internet users on Earth are in Latin America now. And on Twitter, which is, of course, an explosively growing service, globally increased fivefold last year. The number of users in Latin America increased 13-fold, driven actually mainly by Brazil. And so what we want to do with this panel is dig in a little more deeply and look at a few different specific countries and how new technologies, including mobile phones, social media, the internet, have impacted their politics, their governance, and their civil society. And we have a really great panel to do that today, and I'll introduce them each at the beginning. They'll each speak for somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up to questions. So we're going to start with Dr. Christopher Sabatini, just to my left. Dr. Sabatini is Senior Director of Policy at the American Society and Council of the Americas, where he chairs the Rule of Law Working Group. He also chairs the Cuba Working Group, and he's the founder of the Americas Quarterly. He's written a couple articles recently, one in Foreign Policy magazine, another on the Huffington Post, arguing that the U.S. embargo on export of communications technologies to Cuba has had, if anything, a negative impact on the prospect of democratic change there. And we are very glad to have him here today. Carlos Ponce, to my right, is currently the Reagan Faskel Democracy Fellow at the National Endowment for Democracy, where he's working on improving regional mechanisms for defending democracy and civil society in Latin America. He's a leader among human rights, civil society, and democracy advocates, both in his native Venezuela and throughout Latin America. And he has served as Executive Secretary of Venezuela's National Human Rights Commission. Oscar Salazar, who's down at this end, is a technology social entrepreneur and a political activist, and has built technology tools to increase civic participation both in Mexico and around the world. His latest project is called CityVox, which I hope we'll talk a little bit about today. And it's a tool designed to facilitate communication between citizens and their local government. And he'll be launching it along the border region of Mexico. And their website, cityvox.com, just launched, was it yesterday?
Yeah, a couple days ago. Yeah.
A couple days ago, so you should all visit it as soon as possible. And lastly, but not leastly, Ricardo Amado Castillo, at the other end of the panel, is a consultant researcher on the role of social media in Latin American politics. He's currently based at George Washington University. And he has advised political parties and campaigns in Brazil, Peru, and elsewhere on how to integrate new media into their work. And I think as soon as we're done here today, he's getting on a plane down to Brazil to go advise a candidate. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sabatini to open it up and address social media and technology's role in Cuba.
Thanks. Clearly, this is my presentation is somewhat of an outlier here for two main reasons. One is the levels of Cuba internet penetration are significantly lower than any of the countries we're going to talk about here. And second, the U.S. embargo on Cuba prevents the sale of U.S. manufactured goods that would provide Cuban citizens with the tools they need to communicate with themselves. I'm going to talk about both of these issues separately. First, Cuba's level of internet penetration, according to the government itself, is only 16%. According to other sources, more reliable sources, is about 3%. This is the lowest in the hemisphere. Haiti's level of internet penetration is about 23%. But thanks to Mr. Chavez and in Venezuela, and thanks to the U.S. embargo, those 3 to 16% of Cubans will now soon get to be able to download the Granma magazine, newspaper much more quickly, and even stream live the episodes of Allo Presidente, because President Chavez just hooked up Cuba with a fiber optic cable from Caracas to Havana, and is soon actually going to now hook it up with Jamaica. Now, at the same time, though, Cubans don't have access to Twitter, they don't have access to Google, they don't have access to Facebook. They don't even actually have access to U.S. manufactured cell phones. In fact, everything that we're seeing in the people's revolutions in the Middle East, the use of Facebook, the use of cell phones, cameras, videos, even what we saw in Iran, won't be happening in Cuba anytime soon. That's because those products are not allowed to be sold in Cuba. That's because, actually, if you look in the history of people's revolutions, whether it's Eastern Europe or the Middle East or even Serbia, there's not one case of an embargoed country in the U.S. where people have actually risen up and overthrown that regime. There's a very good reason for that. The fact is that embargoes actually prohibit the sort of things that we're actually trying to do in Cuba, which is provide independent access to information, avoid the government filter of what information people and citizens read, and also sort of bypass U.S. government propaganda. So there's no coincidence. And actually, well, first I'll talk about 2 years ago, and talk about how little things have changed in terms of U.S. regulations towards Cuba. In April 2009, President Obama announced a plan to reform U.S. telecom regulations affecting Cuba. And those reforms were intended to authorize U.S. telecom providers to establish a fiber optic cable to Cuba, to allow licenses to provide roaming agreements inside Cuba, to allow providers to license U.S. satellite radio and TV to consumers and viewers inside Cuba, to license people to be able to pay for telecommunications, cell phones and cell phone connections inside Cuba, and to authorize the export of, and this is important, donated consumer communications equipment. This includes cell phones, computers, satellite, and receivers. The problem was, in the interpretation of these new changes, they ran smack into the 1992 Cuba Democracy Act. Now stop here 1 second. Now, what we're talking about is a telecommunications reform that runs into a law from 1992. I don't know about you guys, but I actually didn't even know what email was. Interoffice email, yes, by 1992, but I didn't actually send my first email until I think 1993. So we're actually constrained in our policy towards Cuba by a law that actually predates email, predates Al Gore inventing the internet. But it also, what the CDA does, the Cuba Democracy Act, which is a law, it prohibits investments in telecommunications network and infrastructure within Cuba, including the contributions of funds or anything of value in the making of loans for such a network. What this means is, despite the high-minded rhetoric of President Obama's April 2009 reform, to establish roaming agreements, to allow for fiber optic cable, to allow for licensing for satellite radio and TV, these things don't just sort of get pulled out of the air. You don't actually establish a fiber optic cable like plugging in a toaster into Havana. You've actually got to establish routers, you've got to establish switchers, you've got to establish actually docking agreements in Havana Dock to be able to pull the cable up and plug it in. Those, unfortunately, are prohibited because those are prohibited under the CDA, Cuba Democracy Act, which prohibits anything that can be interpreted as contributing to Cuba's telecommunications infrastructure. The same thing can be said for cell phones and satellite dishes. You actually need a satellite to pull it down. Cell phones need cell phone towers. Those also are prohibited under the Cuba Democracy Act. You can't even actually, just in case any of you have to have a cell phone tower or router in your garage, you're thinking, I'm going to donate that to Cuba. You can't even donate that to Cuba because, again, donations are only limited to consumer use. So basically, this whole reform, which sort of was the first out of the gates, and I support Obama still do, but I think in terms of the interpretation through the sausage-making machine that is our regulatory process within the executive, something came out which didn't quite square with, I think, either the president's and I think most human rights activists' wishes when it came to Cuba. So, you can't have cell phone towers, you can't have routers, you can't have satellite dishes, you can't even have consumer devices. And you know what? When you compare, we did this last year, we compared telecommunications regulations under the U.S. embargo towards Cuba towards embargoes towards other countries. And you know what? We actually have more restrictive conditions in our telecommunications embargo towards Cuba than we do towards Syria, which allows for the licensing of telecommunications equipment, to Burma, which allows for special exceptions to authorized people, and even, get this, to Iran, a country that's building nuclear weapons, upon which we're constantly trying to tighten sanctions. Iran, we allow for the sale of telecommunications equipment in specific circumstances. So Cuba, of all countries, only 9 miles, which many people may disagree with this, does not represent a security threat to us. It has tighter regulations than Iran, Syria, and other countries. Now, the test in all this was, and we raised this with the White House, we raised this with the State Department, they said, well, let's just see how many businesses actually invest in Cuba. But we'll let the proof be in the pudding, because we're open, we're willing to listen. Zero businesses. Okay? And the first thing they said was, well, maybe that's because they just don't see the profit there. Okay? Now, I don't mean to insult my Cuban friends, but if anyone's actually ever listened to one of Castro's 5-hour-length speeches, or even seen the former Congressman Lincoln Diaz-Balart's 3-hour-long speeches on the floor of the Congress, you would know that if there's one good business venture, it's investing in Cubans' ability to talk and charge for it. Okay? Somehow businesses either didn't get this, or the restrictions were such they didn't allow it. So, what has happened is basically we've effectively prevented Cubans from having access to the very things that we're intended, or we're seeing being used throughout. Let me add one other thing, which is often when I raise this point, people always say, well, wouldn't the Castros allow it? My answer is twofold. One is, in 2008, Cuba lifted the ban on, in 2001, Cuba lifted the ban on mobile phone sales to consumers. By 2008, only 7 years later, the number of cell phones inside Cuba had increased by 2,600%. There is a market. But the second thing is this. When people say, well, Castros wouldn't allow it, it's just a stupid game, why are we doing this? My point is, then let them do it. Isn't it the business of authoritarian regimes to deny their own citizens the tools of freedom? Why is the U.S. government in the business now of suddenly denying citizens the tools of freedom? And again, my point being, we're not going to see what we see in the Middle East. We're not going to see what we saw in Eastern Europe and Cuba anytime soon, because simply our own regulations are doing what the Cuban government wants them to do. Thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. When we talk that Chavez has been using this technology, 2.0 technologies, for his campaign, he's just showing us the path. Communication is a way of politics, is a way of control, is a way to be directly engaged one-on-one with all the people that hate or love Chavez at the same time. For the people that hate Chavez, that help Chavez to do also the opposition, what is going to be the opposition message. And for his followers, what is going to be the message. And the other side, you see the student movement using some technologies and changing the way of politics in Venezuela. And that brings me the first thing, this 2.0 messaging technologies has been breaking the traditional monopolies in Venezuela, breaking the owners of the media control of the information, breaking the traditional politicians' control of the opposition, breaking also the manipulation of the message in Venezuela. And they show that in 2007, when the first referendum Chavez tried to bring the new changes in the Constitution, and the student movement just asked for technology. They asked for BlackBerries, and we provide, 100 BlackBerries, because they say, well, the only way to communicate among each other is through ping, text, and messaging. And that was the first shock. When one of the kids told me, well, you know what, when we use traditional campaigns, and you can reach with pamphlets to 1,000, 2,000 people, in the 5 seconds we have been talking, I just sent a message to 2 million people, 2 million students at the same time. So what I need is database, technology, and that's what I need to do my work. And that was the first major strike to Chavez. People using the same technologies to deliver a message. Of course, this is not the end of the game. There are some limits to technologies. Autocrats also use the technologies. Autocrats knew how to control the technologies. They need also, these technologies need leadership also. Because if you have a way to express yourself through blogging, through text-to-text, using the whatever, Twitter, sometimes you feel that that's enough to do your campaigns. That's enough that feels safe to do that kind of opposition or do that kind of work to networking in the country. Sometimes you need the right leadership with the message and also a connection between online 2.0 activities and also street activities. Because you're not going to fight against a regime with all the weapons, with all the control, just with 2.0 technology. It's a tool. It's a fundamental tool. You also need some traditional leadership training. You also need some tools in the way that how can we use as a chain, as a detonator, as a way also to express discontent and as a way to promote changes in any country. And also it's an opportunity for networking, from bringing students from Venezuela, for example, to Nicaragua, to Guatemala, and then stay connected, exchanging views, exchanging ideas, innovation, trying to put some innovation from Venezuela to Belarus, from Belarus to Nicaragua, Nicaragua to Bolivia. So the autocrats, because the autocrats are also connected among themselves. They share ideas, they share projects, they share their own innovation, how to control this technology. Of course, if nobody provides technology to Cuba, it's Venezuela the one that's going to provide technology to Cuba. But now the technology is going to be controlled by Venezuela. It's really hard to control this, how to make the clear division, what is going to be a bank or operation of the message from the regime and when it's going to be the opposition. It's going to be really hard for the government to control this right now. Sometimes technology helps when you don't want to help there. So it's going to help the opposition as well as Cuba. And also sometimes it hurts the market in the US because Venezuela is still buying or Cuba is still buying one-way cell phones from China because the China saw a potential market in Latin America and they have been investing in all the countries in Latin America, especially in Venezuela, especially in Cuba, because they see an opportunity of business there. And they have been helping also some groups in Cuba with texting. How you prevent somebody from texting one another about current event? How you gonna prevent student movement and young movement in Venezuela that began a hunger strike weeks ago to join the hunger strike, to join the protest, to join different initiatives? It's almost impossible to prevent these kind of things, even in countries controlled by autocratic regime like Venezuela, Ecuador, or Nicaragua. But at the same time, you also, if you're going to use this tool, I hear about the diplomacy, it's good. It's good to use this tool as a diplomacy. But also you need to begin to train diplomats to know how to use the technology, to know how to deal with students because they don't know how to do that. They don't know how to use the technology. Just because you say you're going to provide with technology, that doesn't mean that they're going to use the technology. And that doesn't mean that you also need some South-South diplomacy, responsible diplomacy. People from some countries, like Brazil, for example, with the right technology, putting some pressure to the diplomats in Brazil to be responsible, exporting democracy, exporting human rights. As soon as Brazil got stable in terms of democracy and human rights, it has been only selling some of their contractors worldwide without caring about democracy in the rest of the region. And that applies to several countries at the same time. Countries stable that need also to begin to promote democracy worldwide. And we can use, it's not the job only to the US. The US needs to find partners in these countries to begin to promote change in some autocratic governments, some autocratic regimes, and also use civil society from one country, student movement from one country to another using the technology. I believe this is a great opportunity for all of us. Right now I'm here, but at the same time I'm working in Nicaragua with student groups in Nicaragua, coordinate a meeting there. At the same time, coordinate a meeting in Guatemala, I'm in Argentina, I'm here. That brings us tools for activists to be effective. But you need the activists, you need the technology, and you need also the will of somebody who's going to provide the fundings and the technological support. And some governments that will contribute to a South-South effective diplomacy among civil society, young groups, and all the activists region-wide. That's going to be the change in Venezuela, it is going to be the change in Nicaragua, in other countries.
Thank you. Oscar?
Hi. Well, I'm a co-founder of CityBox. The company is pretty much hybrid. We provide technology services, but also we deal with some political and democracy issues. Pretty much, I created this company because I like fixing things that are broken. And I noticed that the user experience, technology is all about user experience. If technology doesn't provide user experience that is appealing, nobody's going to use it, and it's not going to have any impact. So what I understood and noticed is that the user experience of being citizen sucks. It's very hard to be a citizen. People think that everybody, or all the people are citizens. But Antanas Mockus said it clearly, you're not born a citizen, you become a citizen. In some countries, the message are passed wrong. They say, you're going to become a citizen when you're 18 and you're going to vote. So voting is just one moment, in your life. You have to be a citizen on a daily basis. So what we're doing is providing a tool, technology services, a platform where people can become citizens by providing a great user experience. How we do this? We engage citizens by motivating them to report anything they see, anything that needs to be fixed to their local decision makers. Decision makers can be a government, can be an institution, can be private sector, can be whoever is in charge of fixing things. Basically, one example, we were working with some mayors in Mexico City, and one guy told me, okay, I'm in position of power, I'm the mayor, what if I get 1,000 reports, regarding a pothole that needs to be fixed? Because when you rely on social media or new media, you're basically opening a fire hose. You might receive 100,000 of messages. How are you going to deal with this amount of information? What if I get like 10,000 messages reporting 10,000 potholes and I have no infrastructure to address them? And I say, okay, just tell me that. I just need. I don't need you to fix 100,000 potholes. I just need communication. If I report a pothole, you can reply back with an ETA telling me, okay, I have no resources for this specific neighborhood, but I will fix it, in 1 month, because that's, the way I work, and that's what my resources allow me. So communication is very important. If I receive this message, I'm gonna say, okay, this guy's working. It's because he doesn't have resources that he's not gonna fix it right away. If he doesn't say anything, he just stays silent. I'm gonna think this guy is stealing money. This guy he doesn't care about me. So it's about perception. It's communication. We're in this new era of communication. So you have to be very open and say, okay, I'm not powerful enough. I have no unlimited resources, but I'm working, to fix whatever I can. So this is a new approach. The other question that people ask me is why, a mayor or a governor should buy your platform if you're going to expose them, to transparency. And I say, yeah, I'm not exposing, anybody. Transparency, it's great. A lot of people want transparency, but if you ask why do you want transparency, nobody knows why. They say it's cool. Transparency is like buying a Mac. We are cool. You're transparent. It's cool. Transparency creates not jobs, creates an industry. For example, $1 billion industry that was born out of public data. It's weather.com. The other one is GPS, location tracking. It's a $1 billion industry. When the American government, decided to open, this data and make it available to everybody, an industry was born. So you don't have to. Other, perception that people in Latin America has is that the government has to create jobs. That's wrong. The government should create the conditions and the environment so other people, entrepreneurs, can create jobs. 80% of municipalities in some countries are broken. They have no money. And they have no money, they have no resources, they can't, and 80% of the resources they spend it in payroll. So they don't need to create more jobs. They just need to work along with some local entrepreneurs and create the conditions to generate jobs. So my platform is pretty much enabling this communication between citizens and decision makers. Decision makers, by providing creating social capital by responding to citizens' demands, they can create political capital too. So instead of spending $10 million 1 month before the election, they can do their job on a daily basis, and they're going to have a set of voters because they're happy customers. So what I'm doing is I'm introducing customer service to government and decision makers and organizations. It's a new approach. It's like, yesterday I was talking with some guys and I was like, I'm like Zappos, this company, like for governments. So they told me, I'm like a Zapotista, like Zapatista. No, I'm not like that, but I'm just introducing, the concept of customer service, taking care of the citizens and engaging citizens to become, more participatory. In this new, there's a new word. I hate the word government 2.0 or something 2.0 because it has an expiration date. When somebody 3.0 comes, so 2.0 doesn't work anymore. But there's a new word that I really like it, and it's we government. It's not an e-government, it's we government. So all everybody as citizens, we are co-creating, public policies. We're co-creating, the way we want to be governed. So this is what we're doing. We're enabling people, we're enabling decision makers to deal with information. So how we do it? We have a magic machine, I call it like that. So basically it's technology that allows you to aggregate all the tweets, social media, SMS, phone calls, everything that comes from traditional media, but also from new media. We process this into a streamlined workflow, so it's a fully customizable CRM that they can actually operate it and curate all the information coming. On real time, we extract statistics from these reports and present these statistics as a very digestible and very readable graph, so they can base the decision making on data and not of a hunch. That is like a lot of people they are not data driven. So we are bringing some technological scientific approach to make decision making to enhance the decision making process. I've been working in Latin America mainly, but also I have been working in some parts of Europe and Africa. We're using CityBox being used in Benin, for example, like a month ago to track the elections. We work with organized NGOs and we track elections in Benin in real time. We are not mapping. We're not a mapping technology. We're not Ushahidi. These guys are doing an excellent job mapping, but we're more like a real-time information platform. So you can make decisions right away. We also track. We have an implementation in Honduras with Inter-American Development Bank to create the first crime database in Honduras. We're working with the police for this, and with organized teams of police reporting crime using cell phones. We have diverse projects in Mexico with the Ministry of Economy, for example. We are implementing one soon to enhance the user experience of entrepreneurs and receiving, some money from the government. So it's basically my mission is to connect two sides that are disconnected in some way. Right now, the Middle East is very hot, and everybody told me that. Everybody tells me that. Okay, what do you think? What's the role of new media or technology? Do you think that the new media cost? What is happening right now in the Middle East? And I have an answer. It's bad government caused it. People made it possible. Technology made it faster. So that's my my opinion. If you have happy citizens, if you're a government that are responsible, you're engaged with your citizens, and citizens are engaged with you, you don't have to worry about any revolution. If you have 30 years of unhappy customers, unhappy citizens, then you have to worry. So new media is powerful. I agree with Carlos. Technology is just a mean. It shouldn't be never an end. It enables people, it communicates people, it can organize people. And that's what I'm doing, with my company. I'm providing this technology to both sides of to NGOs, to civil society, to random citizens, but also to the decision makers. We cannot achieve democracy. We cannot enhance the world we live in if we don't work together. So I don't agree, that we have to work to separate, of course, if there's an authoritarian regime, of course, there's no way that you can collaborate with the government. But in some countries, in a lot of countries in Latin America, governments are willing, to do something. They're actually working. The only thing is that they need to advertise properly what they're doing, or create public policies based on people's feedback. By connecting these two sides, I think we can co-create and collaborate and create a better society. So that's what I'm doing. I've been involved in some crowdsourcing projects using Ushahidi. I created the first election monitoring platform in Latin America. It was in Mexico in 2009. It's still working. I'm not involved at all, which it was the main goal for me. My main goal was to create it, and then just to leave it, as an open platform so people can actually own the implementation. A couple of NGOs in Mexico, they organized and they launched it a couple of months ago to monitor an election in a very small city in Mexico. So people are using it right now. It's been 2 years, still operational, and they're preparing, for presidential elections 2012. I've also advised people in Venezuela, I also advised people in Bolivia, people in Latin America, Nicaragua, Guatemala, Peru. And basically what I found is people very excited about using technology for good things. They just need, guidance, organization, and to work together. Fragmented civil society is not good for governance. So that's what I do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Well, I'm going to be very brief, just to avoid an instant people. So, even when I present myself as a social media consultant and researcher, the work that I really do is to try to be sure that social media is working in the context of a communication strategy. So when I talk with a potential client or with a real client, and when they begin talking about how do we do this with Twitter or how we do this flash mob thing, the first thing that we really want to work with them is to be sure that they have a clear political strategy and a clear communication strategy, and then we put social media in that. As I'm going to talk only about the use of social media in elections, there are two things in the context that I think that empowers the use of social media. The first is that in regards of elections, the region is moving towards a trend of regulation of media, especially in the context of paid media. Most countries are either discussing or already adopting a tendency to regulate media. so that you cannot buy media whenever you want. You have to deal with an organization of the government that is going to tell you how many minutes you have, when you can put it, and when you have to give me the spot, etc., etc. So that increases the importance of using alternative channels. And the second is the extraordinary level of distrust with political organizations in the region. This is probably elsewhere the same, but in Latin America, both traditional parties and even most of new parties don't have the trust of people. So people believe that they need to express in alternative ways. Even if they are supporting candidates, they feel they are not part of that organization. So those are like two elements of the context that empower the use of this. My first point is, and some of you have already mentioned the way that some presidents, elected officers are using these tools. And we have already 8 presidents in the region using this. We have Chavez, Cristina, Juan Manuel Santos, even Lugo, Paraguay, Dilma, Laura Chinchilla, Felipe Calderon, and Sebastián Piñera. And the importance is, as you have already mentioned, and I have seen several tweets, it's not the number of followers. It's the way that these guys are using this. So it's very clear, for instance, in the case of Chavez, that he's basically using this as a tool for engaging his base, for mobilizing them on a constant basis, which is also part of his political style, and for energizing them for his continuous battles. And you can see a very different style in Sebastián Piñera, who is trying to probably portray this as a way to look more casual and more informal and less, I don't know, less rigid. Or Felipe Calderon, who is probably, you could think that he's trying to portray all the successes of his administration as we are moving very close to the next election. So once again, the importance is that what is the strategy of these guys, what are they using this for? So, but there are not only elected officers. We have, I think that it's important to mention something probably about Antanas Marcus that Oscar mentioned, and I'm not the only one, but I've received several times the question that, well, in the case of Antanas Mopus, this showed that social media is not successful at all. It's not like something that really works everywhere. And I find that question like, I don't like the premise of that question, because I say two things. Well, first, Antanas Mopus had only like 4 or 5% of public support before the Green Wave, let's call it that way, and he was battling a candidate that was the successor of a president which had 70% of public support. So it was not easy to compete with Juan Manuel Santos. And second, well, this only shows that social media is not a silver bullet, as Subsecretary McHale mentioned. This is part of the arsenal of communication tools that you have to use, and if the campaign fails in some point of the message, well, social media is not going to be able to sustain it. But let's keep in mind also that in most elections in the region and everywhere, campaigns are won or lost by only 2 or 3% of the electorate. So you have to use these tools, even if you're not completely convinced, at least this is part of my speech, because you cannot risk not engaging or not communicating with some people that is only using this media. It's only because of that. It's not. You don't have to be convinced at all. You only have to be sure that you cannot risk yourself not to be there. Let's say it that way. And as someone also mentioned, we are very close to the election in Peru, and all 5 candidates in an extraordinary election, both are using constantly all of these platforms. And what is probably fascinating about this election also in Peru is that none of them have really strong political organizations. So you can realize when you read their tweets or their posts in whatever social media platform, is that there is no like an organization indicating the people what they should be communicating. So the message is more dispersed, and it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens. So I'm going to finish with only two additional thoughts. The first one is what has been at the end the impact of this in the region in regards of campaigns. And I would say, even when this sounds like too big, that there are two basic thoughts. One, that social media is part of the communications ecosystem, and you have to see it that way. I guess that new media doesn't make sense at all. So you have to embrace your message with the different communication channels, and you have to be sure that you're adjusting it to the particularities of social media tools and the targets that you are communicating. But the most important part is that you have to think of social media as a way of reinventing your processes in several aspects. One, in the way that you engage people, in the way that you ask them to do things, and that is one of the most important things in campaigns in Latin America, that politicians are very used, probably also everywhere, to talk and not to listen, to talk and not to engage people, and to forget that throughout these platforms you can and you should, because people is expecting so, to ask people to do something. So it's not only that you should have some call to action, it's that people is expecting you to tell them, what do you want me to do? So, and this is something that is not necessarily happening all over the region. There are still very traditional political styles in communication in which campaigners are using this as a new platform, or in a way that I would call as press releases 2.0, even when I agree with the 2.0, is that they are pushing this towards new channels, but basically they are saying only what the candidate did yesterday, where is the candidate going, etc., etc. But they are forgetting that this is basically to engage citizens and to empower them to do something. And probably we all have to agree, we will lose some kind of control, but this is the only way to do it. Thank you.
Well, true to form, we're a little bit behind schedule. We've only got about 15 minutes for questions. And so rather than hog the first question, I will open it up to the floor immediately. And also open up to the panelists if anybody here has questions for anybody else. But put your hand in the air and I'll call on you. Yes.
One-word answers. Finland offers free broadband to everybody, or internet service to everybody. Offered through local cooperatives, not through the state. Yes or no, would this be a public good for Latin American countries? Should they do it?
Yeah, the problem with that is it's not sustainable, costs a lot of money. Even though you will have 100% penetration, people cannot have, they don't have money to afford the devices. So for me, Latin America should focus on access to information rather than access to the internet. You can do it, by creating, bringing internet to schools, to some centers in town. So you can start with this. I think it's baby steps. And then once the country has the economic capacity of buying or affording these kind of devices, then you can bring it to that level. Finland is way advanced. They have the penetration of mobiles and mobile devices are like 3 per user per person or something like that. So access to information is more important than access to internet. So in these countries. So what I recommend, I've seen a lot of projects that are Wi-Fi municipal Wi-Fi died after a year because it's very expensive. It requires some technical skills that some regions don't have, and also at the end of the day, the impact to society is very small. You see rich kids with laptops hanging around and downloading videos instead of providing access to the people that really need. So it's a good idea, but it's to be execution capital. So we should think about it before.
Just one small comment. The traditional Latin American worker begins to work at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. to reach, to take public transportation, and then they return to their home at 7, 8. And in Caracas, it's really complicated because of the barriers. It's really hard to reach. And the good thing is to begin to develop technologies using text-to-text and using texting as a technology, and improve the quality of access in school and centers where people can reach the technology. But the first step is to try to develop better technologies for the people. You see that in the subway, using texting and sending texting. If we use that as a tool, it will be better for improving the capacity of the people in those countries.
In the case of Cuba, which is very limited, I would say it is good, because the penetration is so low, 3%. Anything's better than 3%, except 2%. Greater than that. But the key is, of course, as you're saying, is getting in this case, even the equipment in their hands. It's a step before what you were saying. Anything's better. And it's what you're saying too. Yes, the fiber optic cable from Chavez will actually help in some cases more than it will hurt. Although it's just a shame that the U.S. can't be there to do it. So, yes, but let U.S. companies sell their goods then.
We've all, many of us watched President Obama's speech last night on Libya, and we've seen how we use a no-fly zone and use foreign military assets to help create a zone of freedom for citizens in Libya. To what extent, what tools are available to the U.S. or to the international community to help create those same zones of freedom for the internet and communication in countries that try to quash free flow of information and political debate? And should we be doing that?
There are two initiatives. There's one called Safer Mobile, or the Guardian Project. Basically, freedom is different. The context, like when you bring it to the internet, is different. You are free, to report anything that is wrong in an authoritarian regime, but also they can kill you. So it's not about to be able of doing it, it's to be able of doing it, safely. So by providing tools that encrypt or provide, high standard security to mobile devices, to activists on the ground, or to simple citizens on the ground, you can give them the freedom they want. Also, there's another initiative. It's called Open Mesh, which is it's very cool. I like it. I'm a technologist, so that's why I like it. So, so basically, what we witnessed in Egypt was, for the first time in history, one government shut down the internet for 3 days. So what are you going to do, when somebody, pulls down the plug and says, okay, I have no internet access. So Open Mesh is about creating a network. You carry a device on your backpack. You connect with each other, for example, in Tahrir Square. And then there's one guy in the middle of the crowd with one satellite link. So this guy is providing internet for everybody on Square. And so you can actually be able to say what so this is kind of a very cool initiative, and we have to think about it. Also, we have to think about how we are putting, when they say Facebook revolution, Twitter revolution, Google revolution, whatever, I like it. I really like it. But because I love the service. But the deal is that we're putting democracy on the shoulders of 3 companies. So that's why I don't think it's not a revolution. The revolution was made by the people. So you shouldn't tag it as Facebook or Twitter or Google revolution. So we should think, alternate ways to make it more democratic. Twitter is good, but what happens if somebody blocks Twitter? For example, China has no access to Twitter. What happens if Twitter decides to shut down operations in one country? So we have to create, to find creative ways to communicate, with each other. And people are doing it. There's an alternate service. Twitter is called Identica. It provides same service, different platform, open platform. So by providing this kind of tool, each tool it's good and it's great, but it depends on the context you're going to use it. So information to activists, how to use technology, and under which circumstances it is more powerful than picking up the right technology. is make sure, just understand that when you are carrying a cell phone, you're carrying like a tracking device on a daily basis. So if you say you're free to report anything under an authoritarian regime, you're also telling the guy, okay, you're gonna get killed probably because they know where are you and what's the kind of information. So these three initiatives, I think, are what we need right now to provide, some other options to people on the ground and actually dealing, with these kind of regimes.
I'll just say quickly a couple things. One is the most important thing in you implying this is that more than even just sort of links outside, it's horizontal links among countries that have been atomized by repression, by fear, by distrust. And that's very important. But you're right, the internet devices, mobile devices, actually can provide a way for the government to be able to track people. We saw this actually in China with Google. It's very dangerous, and it actually requires also, I think, having telecoms companies have a certain conscience and being able to pull the plug when they see themselves being used. I think that was a net gain, to be honest, despite some very, very genuinely unfortunate consequences. But it was a net gain in terms of showing a very bright light on what China does. The last thing I'd actually say is, well, two things. One is there are a number of groups who work on this very well and sort of share mirror links and help mask identities. One of them is Access Now, which is a very good network of groups who've worked in Iran and other countries. And then the last, so I think it's good to include those. The last is more than just freedom against repressive governments. There's also just the question of empowering people who don't have access to the internet. And you've alluded to it as well, Carlos, but there's the issue of if you will, what a friend of mine in Brazil calls internet apartheid. The fact that the haves and have-nots are, the gap is growing wider. And in many cases, like Brazil or like Peru or Bolivia, that there's also an overlay of race there as well. And I think in those cases, I think it's almost incumbent upon the U.S. government and others to actually help empower those, so that gap doesn't grow wider between races, to put it bluntly.
Well, if there are any more questions, yeah, let's take one more over here, and that'll be our last.
My name is Rachel Sedone. I'm the reporter for the Latin America Advisor over at the Inter-American Dialogue. And I guess this would be directed at Dr. Sabatini, but if anybody else is interested in this issue. I know a lot of us have been following the Alan Gross case for its political implications, but if you wouldn't mind maybe going into a little bit about he was sponsored by USAID, the actual impetus behind his work there, and if there's sort of a larger sense of that going on, or that was more of an isolated case that just got blown up as to make an example of that kind of work, what the public diplomacy aspect of that is with regard to the telecom.
Yeah, I think there's several things here, and it's complicated. It's very complicated. First, let's be honest, the Bush administration used its overbloated rhetoric and its excessive funds for the support of human rights in Cuba in a way that put people at risk, and that was unnecessary. It put people like Alan Gross at risk. It cloaked this all in this aura of regime change, when in fact there was a lot of cloak and not much dagger. To coin a phrase. I mean, it was just a guy with a satellite phone and a laptop giving it to Jewish groups. That really isn't all that threatening. But the rhetoric of the administration and regime change and the amount of money they were pumping into the program, it completely soured the whole thing. Having said that, though, I think we should also recognize that this does not let the Fidel Castro government off the hook. I mean, they held this guy actually from December 2009 until just recently without even charging him with anything. And so there's this whole sort of backlash. It's, oh my God, the Bush administration's a fault, USA program. But let's be honest. I mean, what government, seriously, takes the guy who's distributing laptops and holds him for over a year and a half without charges, and then on charges of incensing for 15 years for trying to destroy the revolution, for doing nothing more than distributing a satellite phone and a laptop. So there's also that. So there's the blame. There's no moral equivalence here. But the bottom line is that the U.S. government and a USAID contractor wouldn't have to engage in this level of low rent, cloak and dagger stuff if we just let companies sell to Cuba. That's the bottom line. I mean, you know, what exactly he was trying to do there could have been done if you just let the Jewish groups buy the darn laptops and satellite phones if they wanted them. That's what had to be done. You didn't need to engage in a $30 million taxpayer-funded program to liberate Cuba, and we see what that's gotten us. I'm sorry to get a little excited about that, but it's complicated. I've got more to say later.
Well, thank you all for coming, and please join me in thanking our panelists.
Thank you. This is great.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Thank you.
I didn't know you guys were so active.
It's sort of one of our areas.
Good. Hey, good. Yeah, well.
How about that?
Yeah, definitely.
Bueno, thank you very much for everything.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Mira, un placer. Thank you very much for everything.